Professor Kalrix strode into his lecture hall with the kind of confidence that only comes from 2 centuries of academic superiority. His 4 arms moved in perfect synchronization, each appendage carrying a different piece of equipment: holographic projectors, data tablets, and his prized collection of primitive species specimens. The chrome walls of Galactic University's most prestigious xenobiology department gleamed under the artificial lighting, reflecting his scaled purple hide like a monument to intellectual dominance. Another day, another opportunity to enlighten the galaxy's future leaders, he muttered to himself, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The lecture hall stretched before him like a metallic cathedral, with tiered seating that could accommodate over 300 students from 47 different species. Today, however, only about 60 students had bothered to show up for his advanced xenobiology, understanding lesser species course. Kalrix's 6 eyes scanned the familiar faces: Zephyrians with their translucent blue skin, Balani students with their towering 8-foot frames, and the usual collection of Korthak pupils who hung on his every word. His gaze swept methodically across each row until it landed on something that made his secondary stomach lurch with disgust. There, in the back row, sat the most pathetic excuse for a sentient being he had ever encountered in his distinguished career: Maya Thompson, the human exchange student. She was small, laughably small, probably no more than 5.5 feet tall, with that ridiculous mop of brown hair that humans insisted on growing from their scalps. Her pale pink skin looked paper-thin compared to his own armored hide, and those tiny little arms Kalrix had to suppress a laugh. Those pathetic appendages couldn't possibly lift anything heavier than a datapad. Ah yes, he thought, his internal monologue dripping with disdain, the so-called intelligent species from the third rock orbiting a yellow dwarf star. How absolutely precious. Maya sat there with her legs crossed, scrolling through some primitive Earth device, completely oblivious to the fact that she was surrounded by beings who could snap her in half without breaking stride. Her casual demeanor irritated Kalrix more than he cared to admit. Here she was, in the presence of intellectual giants, acting like she belonged among them. The professor's mandibles twitched with amusement as he began setting up his equipment. Today's lesson would be particularly entertaining. He had planned a special segment on Deathworld mythology. A delicious opportunity to debunk the ridiculous rumors surrounding Earth and its laughably fragile inhabitants. Students, Kalrix announced, his voice booming through the hall's acoustic amplifiers. Today we shall examine one of the galaxy's most persistent and amusing misconceptions. The idea that some species, particularly those from so-called Deathworlds, possess extraordinary physical capabilities. His eyes locked onto Maya, who hadn't even bothered to look up from her device. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now then, Kalrix continued, activating his holographic display with a theatrical flourish. Let us begin with the most overrated species in our galactic database: humans. The word rolled off his forked tongue like a curse. These bipedal mammals have somehow convinced certain gullible individuals that they possess remarkable strength and resilience. A 3-dimensional image of a human skeleton appeared in the center of the lecture hall, rotating slowly for all to see. Kalrix gestured dismissively at the projection with 2 of his arms while the other 2 manipulated the controls. Observe the fragility, he sneered. Single-layered calcium phosphate bones, no natural armor plating, no redundant organ systems, or no enhanced musculature. They are, quite literally, the weakest sentient species we have encountered in over 4,000 years of galactic exploration. That's when Maya finally looked up. Her hand rose into the air with such casual innocence that Kalrix almost missed it. When he did notice, his mandibles clicked with barely contained irritation. Yes, Miss Thompson, was it? He pronounced her name like it tasted bad. Actually, Professor Maya said, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent that sounded like grinding metal to Korthak ears, I have a question about your skeletal analysis. The Zephyrian students turned in their seats, their translucent features glowing with curiosity. The Villani leaned forward on their massive frames, suddenly interested. Even the Korthak students, who usually worshipped every word Kalrix spoke, seemed eager to hear what the tiny human had to say. "Please," Kalrix said, spreading his arms in mock generosity, "enlighten us with your insights." "Well," Maya continued, completely missing or ignoring his sarcasm, "your analysis seems to focus only on structural composition. But what about adaptation factors, like environmental pressure differentials?" Kalrix's secondary brain actually stuttered for a moment. Environmental pressure differentials? Where had this primitive creature learned such terminology? "I'm afraid I don't follow your primitive line of reasoning," he replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, it's simple really," Maya shrugged. That infuriating human gesture that made her shoulders rise and fall like she was dismissing the entire academic institution. "I'm just wondering if your comparison accounts for the gravitational and atmospheric conditions of our respective homeworlds." The lecture hall fell silent. Even the air recycling systems seemed to pause. Kalrix felt his confidence waver for just a microsecond before his arrogance reasserted itself. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice taking on the patient tone one might use with a particularly slow child, "I have been studying xenobiology for longer than your entire species has possessed written language. Trust me when I say that humans are, without question, the most fragile and weakest sentient beings in known space." He turned back to his hologram, confident that he had put the insolent little creature in her place. "Your species evolved on a garden world with minimal challenges. Meanwhile, my people, the Korthak, developed on a planet with twice Earth's gravity in an atmosphere that would dissolve human lungs in minutes." "Interesting," Maya said, and Kalrix could hear the smile in her voice even without looking at her. "So you're saying physical strength is directly related to environmental adaptation?" "Precisely," Kalrix snapped, finally seeing an opportunity to crush this upstart once and for all. "Which is why I propose we settle this discussion with a practical demonstration." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in an ancient gladiatorial arena. Kalrix's mandibles spread wide in what his species considered a predatory grin. This was it. This was the moment he would finally put an end to all the ridiculous Deathworld nonsense that had been circulating through certain academic circles. "A demonstration?" Maya asked, tilting her head with that innocent curiosity that made Kalrix's skin crawl. "What kind of demonstration?" "A simple test of physical capability," Kalrix announced, his voice booming across the lecture hall as he began pacing back and forth like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Nothing dangerous, of course. We wouldn't want to accidentally harm our delicate exchange student." The Zephyrian students began murmuring among themselves, their bioluminescent patches flickering with excitement. The Villani leaned even further forward, their massive forms casting shadows across the lower rows. This was better entertainment than they had expected from advanced xenobiology. "Oh, that sounds fun," Maya exclaimed, clapping her hands together with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. "I love physical challenges. What did you have in mind, Professor?" Kalrix paused his pacing, savoring the moment. 2 centuries of academic superiority had led to this perfect opportunity to demonstrate, once and for all, why humans were nothing more than galactic curiosities. "Arm wrestling," he announced with theatrical flair. "A simple test of raw strength between representatives of our respective species." Maya's eyes lit up like a child who had just been offered candy. "Really? That sounds amazing. I haven't had a good arm wrestling match since I left Earth." The professor's confidence swelled to astronomical proportions. The girl was actually excited about her own humiliation. This was almost too easy. "Before we begin," Kalrix continued, moving to the center of the lecture hall, "let me educate everyone about Korthak physiology." He flexed one of his massive arms, the scaled muscle rippling beneath his hide like liquid metal. "Our bones are reinforced with titanium-dense deposits, making them roughly 4 times stronger than standard carbon-based skeletal structures." The students watched in fascination as Kalrix demonstrated his enhanced musculature, his biceps expanding to nearly twice the size of Maya's entire torso. Furthermore, he continued, clearly enjoying the attention, Korthak muscle fibers are twice as dense as human tissue and contain enhanced protein chains that allow for exponentially greater force generation. Wow, Maya said, her voice filled with what sounded like admiration. That's really impressive, Professor. You must be incredibly strong. Indeed, Kalrix preened, his ego reaching critical mass. I regularly lift weights that would crush a human flat. My casual grip strength could snap steel bars. By now the other students had begun placing bets. Kalrix could hear the whispered conversations as credits changed hands. 50 credits on the professor finishing it in under 3 seconds. Hissed a Zephyrian. Too generous, rumbled a Villani. I say 2 seconds maximum. Anyone taking bets on the human? Asked a Korthak student. The silence that followed was deafening. Kalrix's internal smugness meter broke past all previously recorded levels. This was it. This was his moment of absolute triumph. Not only would he demonstrate superior Korthak strength, but he would do it in front of a lecture hall full of witnesses who would spread the story throughout the entire university. Shall we set up the challenge then? Maya asked, standing up from her seat and stretching like she was preparing for a light morning jog. Kalrix watched her tiny form move down the steps toward his desk, and he had to suppress a laugh. She looked like a child approaching a grown adult. This was going to be the most one-sided demonstration in academic history. Oh, this is going to be delicious, he thought to himself, his mandibles practically vibrating with anticipation. What happened next would be recounted in hushed whispers throughout the Galactic University for decades to come. Maya didn't approach Kalrix's desk. Instead, she simply plopped back down in her seat in the back row, pulled out her datapad, and began scrolling through what appeared to be her lunch menu options. Kalrix said, his theatrical confidence wavering slightly. Miss Thompson, we need to set up the arm wrestling table. Oh, that's okay, Maya replied without looking up, her tone as casual as someone declining a second helping of dessert. I'm comfortable here. Besides, I'm trying to decide between the cafeteria's synthetic protein blend and their mystery meat special. Both sound equally terrifying. Kalrix blinked all 6 eyes in confusion. I'm afraid I don't understand. How exactly do you propose we arm wrestle from across the lecture hall? Maya glanced up from her device with the kind of expression usually reserved for explaining basic mathematics to particularly slow students. Oh, you can just come over here. I'm not really in the mood to stand up right now. The audacity. The sheer, mind-boggling audacity of this creature was beyond anything Kalrix had encountered in 2 centuries of academic life. Here was a being that barely weighed as much as his left leg, suggesting that he, a distinguished professor of xenobiology, should accommodate her laziness. Very well, he said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying just enough irritation to let the students know how incredibly generous he was being. If the mountain won't come to Muhammad, as you humans say. Kalrix strode up the lecture hall steps with renewed confidence, his 4 arms swinging dramatically. Each footstep echoed through the chamber like thunder. The other students turned in their seats to watch the spectacle, their various species-specific expressions all conveying the same sentiment. This was going to be a massacre. When he reached Maya's row, Kalrix had to lean down considerably to get to her level. The size difference was even more ridiculous up close. His scaled purple hand, when fully extended, was easily 3 times the size of her pale pink one. Shall we begin? He asked, positioning his primary right arm on Maya's tiny desk. Sure thing, Professor Maya said, still not looking up from her datapad. She casually placed her elbow on the desk and extended her hand toward his. Just let me finish reading about today's lunch specials. Apparently, they're serving something called Vegan Surprise, which, knowing this place, probably contains actual vegetables from 17 different star systems. Their hands met, and that's when Kalrix's world ended. Maya's grip felt like being grabbed by a mechanical press disguised as human flesh. Her fingers, those tiny, delicate-looking appendages that couldn't possibly pose a threat to anyone, were closed around his hand with the casual inevitability of a neutron star's gravitational pull. You know what, Maya said conversationally, still reading her menu, I think I'll go with the mystery meat. At least then I'll know I'm taking a calculated risk. She applied pressure. Not a lot of pressure. Not the kind of force one might expect from someone trying to win an arm wrestling match. Just a gentle, almost absent-minded squeeze, like someone testing the ripeness of fruit at a market. The sound that followed would haunt Kalrix's nightmares for the rest of his considerably shortened academic career. Crack. It wasn't just one crack. It was a symphony of destruction, a cascading series of snaps and pops as his titanium-reinforced bones, those magnificent evolutionary adaptations that had taken millions of years to perfect, simply gave way under the casual pressure of Maya's grip. His ulna went first, folding like a pretzel. Then his radius followed suit, the titanium deposits that he had bragged about moments earlier proving as effective as tissue paper against a plasma torch. His wrist bones collapsed inward with wet, grinding sounds that made several students in the front row vomit into their note-taking devices. Kalrix's scream started somewhere deep in his primary lung and built to a crescendo that shattered 3 of the lecture hall's acoustic dampeners. It was the kind of sound that prehistoric creatures might have made while being eaten alive by larger prehistoric creatures. Aya! Up! Aha! Hey! Hate! Maya finally looked up from her datapad, her expression mildly curious, like someone who had just heard an unusual bird call. "Oh," she said with the same tone one might use to comment on unexpected weather. "Sorry, Professor. Was I supposed to try harder? I was holding back because I didn't want to break your desk or anything." The lecture hall erupted into pandemonium. Emergency medical alarms began blaring as Kalrix collapsed to the floor, cradling what remained of his arm while making sounds that no sentient being should ever have to make. His proud purple scales had turned a sickly gray-green color, and bodily fluids that definitely weren't supposed to be outside his body were leaking onto the pristine chrome flooring. Medical emergency in Lecture Hall 7, the automated system announced with typical bureaucratic calm. Medical emergency in Lecture Hall 7. Students were scrambling over each other to get a better view, while others were desperately trying to get as far away as possible. The Zephyrians' bioluminescent patches were strobing in distress patterns, the Vellani were backing away despite their 8-foot frames, and the Korthak students looked like they had just witnessed their entire worldview being fed through a garbage disposal. Maya, meanwhile, had returned to her datapad. "Seriously, though," she said, completely ignoring the chaos around her, "does anyone know what mystery meat actually means in this context? Because I'm getting some seriously questionable vibes from the description." The medical team burst through the lecture hall doors like they were responding to a terrorist attack. 6 different species of medical professionals, all equipped with emergency trauma equipment, advanced scanners, and enough pain medication to sedate a small moon. Dr. Valaxis, the head of Galactic University's medical department, took one look at Kalrix's mangled arm and immediately began barking orders in 4 different languages simultaneously. "Get me a bone regenerator and a neural dampener. And somebody call the prosthetics department because we're going to need a complete replacement." "What happened here?" demanded Security Chief Mortak, a battle-scarred Vellani who had seen combat in 3 different galactic conflicts and thought he was prepared for anything. Maya raised her hand politely. "Oh, that was me. Professor Kalrix wanted to arm wrestle to demonstrate human weakness. I think there might have been a slight miscalculation in his hypothesis." Chief Mortak's jaw dropped so far it nearly hit the floor. "You did this? To Professor Kalrix?" "The Professor Kalrix?" "Well, yeah," Maya shrugged, finally closing her datapad and giving the conversation her full attention. "Though I should probably mention that Earth's gravity is about 3.2 times higher than the Korthak homeworld. That might have been a relevant factor to consider." And the medical team froze mid-treatment. Dr. Valaxis looked up from Kalrix's ruined arm with an expression of dawning horror. 3.2 times higher gravity?" he whispered. "Yep," Maya nodded cheerfully. "Plus our atmospheric pressure is roughly double what most habitable worlds consider normal. Oh, and our oxygen content is actually toxic to most species if they're exposed to it for extended periods." A Zephyrian student in the front row raised a trembling appendage. "But But that would mean that I've been living my entire life in what you guys would consider a high-pressure, high-gravity, toxic environment? Maya finished helpfully. Yeah, pretty much. It's why Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. I actually had to get special permits just to attend university here. The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. Class 12? Chief Mortak repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The highest classification we have is Class 8, and that's for worlds where the rain is made of sulfuric acid. Maya laughed, the sound surprisingly warm and pleasant despite the circumstances. Oh, that's adorable. You guys think sulfuric acid rain is dangerous. Back home, we have hurricanes that can level entire cities, earthquakes that split continents, volcanoes that can alter global weather patterns, and that's just the weather. Don't even get me started on the wildlife. Dr. Valaxis was frantically pulling up files on his medical scanner. According to this data, a being adapted to those conditions would possess approximately, his voice trailed off as the numbers appeared on his screen. Approximately 40 times the muscle density and bone strength of a standard Korthak. It sounds about right, Maya nodded approvingly, though that's probably on the low end. I mean, my morning workout routine involves lifting weights that would probably crush this entire lecture hall. And that's just to maintain basic fitness levels? Security Chief Mortak was slowly backing toward the exit. Your workout routine? Oh yeah, Maya said with genuine enthusiasm. Back home, I bench press about 800 pounds, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's really just light maintenance. My squat max is around 1,200 pounds, and I can deadlift about 1,500 on a good day. Though to be fair, that's in Earth gravity. Here, I'd probably need to add a few more zeros to those numbers to get the same workout. A Korthak student who had been frantically calculating on his datapad looked up with pure terror in his eyes. But that means she could lift approximately 32,000 pounds in our gravity. Give or take, Maya agreed pleasantly. By now, someone had pulled up the security footage of the arm wrestling incident on the main lecture hall display. The medical team watched in fascinated horror as the high-speed cameras captured the exact moment of contact. According to the force sensors in the desk, Dr. Valaxis announced, his voice hollow with disbelief, Miss Thompson applied approximately 3.7 pounds of pressure. Maya looked genuinely surprised. Really? That much? I was trying to be super gentle. That represents, the doctor continued, his scanner beeping frantically as it ran calculations, approximately 0.003% of her estimated maximum strength capacity. The implications of that statement hit the lecture hall like a meteor impact. If Maya had used her full strength, she wouldn't have just broken Kalrix's arm. She would have reduced him to component atoms. Within 30 minutes of what would forever be known as the incident, every high-ranking official at Galactic University was crammed into emergency conference room, alpha like sardines in a particularly expensive can. Chancellor Vorthak, a dignified Zephyrian who had survived 3 galactic wars and 2 university budget meetings, sat at the head of the crystalline table with his bioluminescent patches flickering in patterns that roughly translated to what the hell just happened. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes right before a complete nervous breakdown. One of our most distinguished professors challenged a human exchange student to a physical contest, and she accidentally destroyed his arm while reading her lunch menu? Dean Zerlach of the Xenobiology department, normally a picture of academic composure, was stress molting all over his chair. The medical report is disturbing, Chancellor. Professor Kalrix's arm isn't just broken. It's been completely restructured at the molecular level. The titanium deposits in his bones have been compressed into what can only be described as abstract art. And the human? Chancellor Vorthak asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Maya Thompson is currently in advanced quantum physics, taking notes and occasionally asking questions about particle acceleration. Professor Zynix reports that she seems delightfully engaged with the coursework. Meanwhile, 3 floors down in the medical bay, Professor Kalrix lay sedated in a recovery pod that looked more like a mechanical chrysalis than a hospital bed. His right arm, or what remained of it, had been replaced with a sleek cybernetic prosthetic that was probably worth more than most professors' annual salaries. Dr. Valaxis stood beside the pod, reviewing surgical notes that read like a report from a natural disaster. Complete skeletal reconstruction required. Muscle tissue regeneration at 67%. Nervous system integration with cybernetic components proceeding normally, all things considered. Will he recover? Asked Assistant Dean Morlack, who had drawn the short straw and been assigned to check on the patient. Physically? Yes, psychologically? Dr. Valaxis gestured at the monitoring equipment, which showed Kalrix's brain activity spiking every time anyone mentioned the word human within a 50-foot radius. Let's just say he's developed some interesting new phobias. Back in the emergency meeting, the discussion had moved from damage assessment to damage control. "We need new protocols," announced Security Chief Mortak, his massive Vellani frame taking up roughly a quarter of the conference room. "I've been reviewing our safety standards, and apparently nobody thought to include guidelines for students who could accidentally destroy the campus by sneezing too hard." Chancellor Vorthak rubbed his temples with 2 of his 6 hands. "What kind of protocols are we talking about?" "Well, for starters, Chief Mortak consulted his datapad, mandatory strength limiters for all human students. He had padded furniture in any classroom containing humans. Emergency medical teams on standby during any physical education classes, and possibly hazard pay for any faculty member brave enough to teach them." "Hazard pay?" squeaked Dean Zerlach. Professor Thurvax from Advanced Combat Training locked himself in his office after hearing about the incident, Chief Mortak explained. "He's refusing to come out until we guarantee that Maya Thompson won't be enrolling in any of his courses." "She's already enrolled in Advanced Combat Training," announced Registrar Pilnex, consulting her scheduling system. "First class is tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dean Zerlach fainting onto the conference table. "Perhaps." "Oh," Chancellor Vorthak said with the weary tone of someone who had just realized his quiet academic career was about to become very, very interesting. "We should consider implementing a new course category, something like Deathworld species management, or how not to accidentally challenge apocalyptic beings to physical contests." "I'll draft the curriculum," whispered Dean Zerlach from his prone position on the table. 3 weeks later, Professor Kalrix stood before his xenobiology class once again. His new cybernetic arm gleamed under the lecture hall's lighting, a constant reminder of what happened when academic arrogance met Deathworld reality. The holographic display behind him no longer showed human skeletal structures. Instead, it displayed a simple message: "Why we don't mess with Deathworlders, a survival guide." "Good morning, class," Kalrix said, his voice carrying a humility that hadn't been there before. "Today we'll be discussing the most important lesson in xenobiology, the critical difference between appearing weak and actually being weak." Maya sat in her usual spot in the back row, looking as bored as ever. Except now, instead of scrolling through her datapad, she was casually bench-pressing her desk with one hand while taking notes with the other. The 400-pound chrome and titanium piece of furniture moved up and down like it was made of foam, keeping perfect rhythm with her breathing. The other students watched this display with the kind of fascinated terror usually reserved for natural disasters or particularly dangerous zoo exhibits. "As I was saying," Kalrix continued, his cybernetic fingers clicking against his podium, "humans may appear to be fragile, soft-skinned creatures with no natural defenses. This appearance is..." He paused, watching Maya complete another casual rep with furniture that could crush most of his students, somewhat misleading. A Zephyrian student raised a trembling appendage. "Professor, how exactly did previous xenobiologists classify humans as a weak species?" Kalrix's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile or a nervous tick. "Excellent question. You see, most of our initial observations were conducted from a safe distance. We never actually tried to," he gestured with his cybernetic arm, "physically engage with them." Maya finished her desk pressing set and casually set the furniture back down, causing a small tremor that rattled the windows. She then pulled out what appeared to be a protein bar and bit into it. The wrapper crinkled with a sound like breaking bones. In conclusion, Kalrix announced, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "Let this be a lesson to all of us. Humans may look like delicate flowers, but delicate flowers don't evolve on planets where everything is actively trying to kill them." He looked directly at Maya, who gave him a cheerful little wave with the hand that had casually destroyed his academic credibility along with his arm. "Class dismissed," Kalrix said, "and remember, never, ever underestimate a species that considers gravity a light workout."